She inherited the ruined mill that no one had wanted for 18 years, and discovered that the wind held a secret that would change everything. Can you imagine hearing impossible voices coming from an abandoned place, only to find out they're trying to tell you where a fortune is hidden? Well, this story really happened back in September of 1891, deep in the hollows of the Appalachian Mountains. Before we go any further, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that like button down below, because what this woman discovered inside that mill will astonish you in a way you never imagined. The wind carried whispers that changed not only her destiny, but that of an entire forgotten community. And tell me in the comments what town you're watching this story from. I love knowing how far these narratives travel. The afternoon of September 17th, 1891, hung heavy over the red clay road that cut through the Appalachian interior. The wind blew hard from the southeast, kicking up clouds of orange dust that clung to the sweaty skin and stung the eyes of anyone who dared to travel in the suffocating heat. Eleanor Vance held the reins of the rented horse with hands that trembled more from exhaustion than from fear. Though fear was there too, pulsing deep in her chest like a muffled drum that never stopped. Behind her, clinging to the makeshift saddle, 9-year-old Peter kept a firm arm around his younger sister, 5-year-old Laura, who was whimpering softly against her brother's back. 2 old wooden trunks, tied with rope to the animal's flank, carried all that was left of an entire life. Mended clothes, dented pots, 3 thin blankets, a wooden crucifix, and the Singer sewing machine that weighed as much as the hope Eleanor was trying to keep alive. The sun was beginning to sink behind the hills, covered in dense forest, when the trail made its final turn and the mill appeared. Eleanor pulled the reins too hard and the horse snorted, shaking its head with impatience. She couldn't stop the knot from tightening in her stomach as she saw what was to be her new home. The mill at St. Peter's Falls rose like a stone phantom against a sky turning the color of embers. 3 stories of thick walls built with irregular river stones, now covered in layers of dark green moss and ivy that climbed through the cracks like bony fingers, trying to pull it all back into the earth. The windows were empty holes, without glass or boards, just darkness peering out from within. The roof had large gaps where shingles had fallen, creating spaces through which you could already see the sky. The giant water wheel, which had once turned with the current of Cedar Creek, was still, consumed by red rust and rotting wood that hung in long splinters. Next to the mill, almost swallowed by the tall grass, stood the miller's house, a wattle and daub construction with plaster crumbling in chunks, its roof sagging on one side, a wooden door hanging by a single hinge. The yard, which must have once been a vegetable garden, was now a tangle of weeds, vines, and thorny bushes. A chicken coop of loose planks leaned to one side like a drunk about to fall over. Further on, a forest of ancient cedars closed off the horizon, their thick trunks and heavy canopies swaying in the wind, producing a sound that resembled a groan or a lament. Peter was the first to speak, his voice thin and frightened. "Mama, is this really it? Are we going to live here?" Eleanor swallowed hard, forcing a firmness she didn't feel. "This is it, my son. I know it looks rough, but we'll clean it up. You'll see it'll be fine." Laura lifted her small, tear-streaked face and said she wanted to go back, that she was scared, that this place was frightening. Eleanor dismounted with tired movements, lifted her daughter into her arms, even though her own were aching from holding the reins all day, and pressed the little girl against her chest. "We have nowhere else to go, my sweet girl. This is ours now, and Mama promises she will take care of you. Always." But as she said it, Eleanor looked at the ruined mill and felt the crushing weight of the truth. She hadn't chosen this place. This place was the last rotten plank to cling to before sinking completely. And if that plank broke, there was nothing below but the void. 8 months earlier, Eleanor's life still had some semblance of dignity. She was a respected seamstress in the small town of Stone Creek, a few leagues away. Married to George Miller, the foreman of a tobacco farm, they lived in a simple but clean house on the edge of town. 3 small rooms, polished floorboards, a good roof, walls whitewashed twice a year. Eleanor sewed for the wealthier families, Sunday dresses, christening gowns, burial shrouds when needed. George managed the farmhands, oversaw the harvest, and received a decent wage that, combined with her earnings, ensured food on the table, mended but presentable clothes, and even a few extra dollars that George said he was saving to buy a small homestead of their own one day. The morning of January 14th, 1891, began like any other. Eleanor was in the kitchen preparing lunch, beans bubbling on the wood-burning stove, rice resting in the pot, a small piece of salt pork frying in its own fat. Peter was playing in the yard with wood scraps he pretended were oxen. Laura was sleeping in the hammock strung between 2 ceiling beams. George had left before sunrise with a cart loaded with firewood he was going to sell at the neighbouring farm. It was extra work he did on Saturdays to earn a little more cash. Eleanor was stirring the beans when she heard the scream, not just any scream, a scream that tore through the warm morning air with such pure desperation that she dropped the spoon and ran to the window before she even processed what she was doing. The upward slope of the road leading to the ridge was visible from her kitchen window. And that's where Eleanor saw it. The overloaded cart tipping dangerously on the steep curve. George trying to hold the reins, the oxen snorting in fright. The rear wheel hitting a large rock, the fall happening in slow motion, the cart turning on its side, the entire load of logs breaking free, tumbling, rolling. George jumping to try to save himself, but not being fast enough. The largest, heaviest log hitting him squarely, his body disappearing under the timber that continued to roll, crushing, destroying. Eleanor didn't even remember running. But when she came to her senses, she was there on the road, kneeling on the dirt, her hands stained with blood that wasn't hers, trying to push a cedar log that must have weighed 3 times as much as a full-grown ox. People appeared from all sides. Strong men pushed the timber away. But it was too late. George Miller died instantly, they said. He didn't suffer, they said. It was quick, they said. Lies. Eleanor saw his eyes. The look of someone who felt everything for one eternal second before the world went dark. The funeral was simple. Reverend August recited the usual words. Neighbors brought food that Eleanor couldn't eat. Everything seemed to be covered by a thick layer of cotton that muffled sounds, colors, feelings. Peter cried without fully understanding. Laura was too young to comprehend that her father would never come back. And Eleanor just existed, breathing because her body insisted on breathing, but without being truly alive. The first week after the funeral, Mrs. Gable, their closest neighbor, helped with the children. The second week, Eleanor went back to sewing because there was no luxury of stopping. The third week, the owner of the house they rented showed up with a paper in his hand and a sour look on his face. He wanted to talk about the overdue rent. Eleanor knew nothing of overdue rent. She always paid on time. The man, a Mr. Rogers, showed her the papers. George owed 3 months. Eleanor felt the floor open up beneath her. How could he owe? Rogers gave her 1 week to pay it all or get out. She went to see George's boss at the Santa Rita plantation. Colonel Augustus Fairchild received her on the porch of the main house, sitting in a rocking chair, puffing on a cigar. Eleanor explained the situation, said George had always been an honest worker, and asked to receive the wages still due to him. The colonel looked at her with that mixture of pity and impatience that wealthy men have when dealing with the problems of the poor. "Elizabeth," he began, calling her by the wrong name. "John was a good worker, I won't deny that, but the little house you were living in belongs to the plantation. I already have another foreman arriving next week with his family. They'll need the house." Eleanor tried to explain that she didn't live in a plantation house. She lived in town. The colonel sighed with irritation. George's salary was paid up to the last day he worked. I don't owe anyone a thing. If you're behind on rent, that's your problem, not mine. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have things to do, she insisted. But, Colonel, I have nowhere to go. My children are small. I just need some time to get back on my feet. The man stood up from his chair, looking as though his patience had run out. I don't run an orphanage, ma'am. We all have to look after our own. Good day. He went inside and closed the door. Eleanor walked back to town, crying with rage, humiliation, and despair. She sought out the Reverend. Reverend August listened attentively, looked concerned, and said he'd see what he could do, that the church had a fund to help the needy. 3 days later, he sent a message through the sacristan. The church could offer $5 in aid. $5. The overdue rent was $42. Eleanor would have to leave anyway. That's when Sebastian Thorne appeared, a wealthy landowner with large tracts of land south of town, a man in his 50s with a prominent belly, a gold chain on his waistcoat, a cigar always in the corner of his mouth, and a gaze that slid over women like a snake, sizing up its prey. He and George had been friends, people said. They played cards on Saturday nights at Joe's saloon. Sebastian showed up at Eleanor's door late one February afternoon. He offered his condolences, spoke of what a good man George was, and asked if she needed any help. Eleanor, still naive in her desperation, told him about the rent, about the colonel, about the church that hadn't helped enough. Sebastian listened to it all, nodding his head with a look of understanding. When she finished, he gave a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. Look, Eleanor, I'll be honest with you. George owed me money, quite a bit of it, but I wasn't going to collect from you because I know it's not your fault. It was between him and me. Games. You understand? He'd bet and I'd lend. But since you're talking about rent, I have a proposal. Eleanor felt something cold slide down her spine, but pretended not to notice. What proposal? Sebastian moved closer. I'll pay off all of George's debts, the rent, everything. You and the children will be secure. In return, you become a friend to me. Keep me company now and then. You take care of me, the way a woman takes care of a man. Discreetly, of course. No one needs to know. You'll be well off. I'll be happy. Everybody wins. The silence that fell in the small room was so heavy it felt solid. Eleanor looked at this fat, sweaty man, reeking of tobacco and cheap brandy, smiling as if he were offering her a favor. She felt disgust rise in her throat. She felt rage boiling in her stomach. She felt humiliation burning on her face. And before she could think, before she could calculate the consequences, she spat, a well-aimed glob that hit Sebastian Thorne right in the middle of his face. The smile died instantly. The man slowly wiped his face, his eyes narrowing into a cold hatred. You're going to regret this, you wretched woman. You'll be begging me on your knees and I'll laugh in your face. I'll make you crawl through the mud. You and those miserable brats. He left, slamming the door with a force that made the wall tremble. 2 weeks later, a marshal showed up. An eviction notice. Eleanor had 3 days to vacate. When she questioned the deadline, the marshal showed her the documents. Sebastian Thorne had bought her debt from Mr. Rogers and fast-tracked the legal process. The sheriff's cousin was married to him. The county judge was his crony. There was no appeal. Eleanor sold everything she could. Not the sewing machine. That was her livelihood. But furniture, pots, her better clothes, even George's boots. She managed to get $28. She paid part of the debt to buy herself another week. She looked for work. No one would hire her. A widow with 2 small children is a dead weight, they said. She looked for a place to rent, nothing she could afford. She looked for relatives. She had no living kin who were willing to help. Her mother had died in childbirth when Eleanor was a child. Her father died of drink 3 years later. She was raised by her maternal grandfather, who died when she was 12. After that, she was passed from one distant relative to another until she married George at 17. It was Mrs. Gable, who brought the news that changed everything. She arrived one March morning with a yellowed envelope in her hand. It had come from Richmond, forwarded from a law office in Charleston. A letter from a solicitor. Eleanor opened it with trembling fingers. The language was difficult, full of legal terms she barely understood. But the gist was clear. Michael Vance, her maternal grandfather, who had died 20 years ago, had left a will. Eleanor was the sole living heir to a rural property located in the vicinity of St. Peter's Falls, a grist mill with adjoining lands, 80 acres, a house. The property had been abandoned since March 1873, when Vincent Vance, Eleanor's great-grandfather, disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Michael, Vincent's son and Eleanor's grandfather, had never wanted to return to the place. He left the inheritance to his granddaughter in the hope that she might do something with it, should she ever need it. Eleanor read the letter 3 times. Mrs. Gable remained silent. Finally, the widow looked up, her eyes wet, but with a glimmer of something that could have been either hope or madness. "I have a place." Her neighbor looked uncertain if this was good news. "My dear, do you know what that place is? Do you know why no one has wanted it for 18 years? Eleanor knew. Everyone in the region knew the story of the mill at St. Peter's Falls, the miller who vanished, the rumors of a hidden fortune, the failed attempts to live there, the legends of hauntings. But Eleanor looked at Peter and Laura, sleeping together on the last bed she hadn't yet sold, and she looked at the eviction notice tacked to her door, and she looked at her own calloused hands that no longer had anything to sew. "I have no choice," she told Mrs. Gable. "It's that or the street." The neighbor sighed deeply and nodded slowly. "Then may God go with you, my child, and may the saints protect those children." The news that Eleanor had inherited the mill spread faster than wildfire in a dry field. In 2 days, everyone in Stone Creek knew, and in 3 days, Sebastian Thorne appeared again. This time, he was polite. He knocked on the door, instead of just walking in. He took off his hat when she answered. He said he'd heard about the inheritance. He offered to buy the mill for $500. A good price, he said, more than the place was worth. Eleanor said it wasn't for sale, Thorne insisted. The place was a ruin. No one could live there. She would regret it. Better to sell now, take the money, and start over somewhere else. Eleanor repeated that it wasn't for sale. The landowner slowly put his hat back on, his eyes returning to that dangerous coldness. "You won't last a week in that cursed place. When you come running back, I won't offer you half. Remember that." And he left, leaving the scent of a threat in the air. 3 days later, Eleanor packed the 2 trunks, sold the last of her belongings, rented a horse from old Mr. Manuel with a promise to pay when she could, and set off with her children for the mill. Mrs. Gable cried as she said goodbye. Reverend August gave a hurried blessing but offered no practical help. The rest of the town watched in silence as the widow and her 2 orphans headed down the red clay road toward the place that nobody wanted. And now, there she was, standing in front of the ruined mill as the sun disappeared behind the mountains and the evening chill began to set in. Peter slid off the horse, helping Laura down. The 2 of them clung to their mother, staring at the place with eyes wide with fear. Eleanor took 3 deep breaths, said a silent prayer for strength, and spoke in a voice she tried to make sound confident. "Let's go inside. We need to see what it's like before it gets completely dark." The door to the house was locked, but the wood was so rotten that a firm push with her shoulder was enough to break the latch. The smell that billowed out was of mold, animal droppings, rotted wood, and something else. Something indefinable that Eleanor preferred not to identify. She managed to light a candle with difficulty as the wind kept blowing it out. The weak light revealed a desolate interior, a single room that must have served as both kitchen and living area. An uneven dirt floor, full of holes. wattle and daub walls with large patches where the plaster had fallen away, revealing the bamboo lattice within. A ceiling with large holes through which you could already see the darkening sky. Two small rooms in the back, one with the remains of a dilapidated wooden bed, the other completely empty except for cobwebs that covered everything like a ghostly curtain. In the corner, a cracked clay stove with a clogged chimney. A window without glass or shutters, just an empty frame through which the cold wind entered. Laura began to cry. Peter turned pale but tried not to show his fear. Eleanor sat on one of the trunks, pulled her children close, and let the tears fall because there was no point in pretending everything was all right anymore. But as she cried, as she felt the impossible weight of having to turn this place into a home, she also felt something else. A stubborn refusal, a righteous anger. If Sebastian Thorne and all the others thought she would give up, thought she would come back begging, they were mistaken. Eleanor Vance had lost everything. She had nothing left to lose, and people with nothing left to lose are capable of anything. She managed to improvise something resembling a bed by gathering the least rotten planks from the old frame and laying blankets over them. She tucked the children in together, covered them well, and sang softly until they fell asleep. Then she stayed awake, sitting near the door, clutching a machete she had brought in her luggage, listening to the sounds of the night. The wind howling through the cracks in the walls, the old wood of the mill groaning, the water of the creek rushing over the stones, owls hooting in the forest, and something more. A low, constant whisper that came from the direction of the mill. It was probably just the wind passing through the structures of wood and rusted metal. Probably. The first few days were a nightmare of physical labor and constant fear. Eleanor rose with the sun and slept only when she could no longer stay awake. She tried to patch the roof using planks she tore from the mill. It didn't work perfectly, but it covered the largest holes. She cleared the dirt floor of weeds, animal feces and gravel. She scrubbed the walls with creek water until her arms ached. She improvised a curtain with a piece of old fabric for the main window. She repaired the clay stove with new clay she fetched from the riverbank. She built a fire and cooked cornmeal with water and salt, because that was all they had. Peter helped by carrying stones, fetching water, and sweeping with a broom of twigs they made together. Laura tried to help, but was too small. She would sit in a corner, making dolls out of straw. The nearest village, St. Peter's Falls, was an hour's walk away. A tiny village, 30 houses at most, a stone church in the centre, a general store that sold a little of everything. A handful of dirt streets. The population consisted of poor farmers, washerwomen, a blacksmith, a carpenter, and a reverend. When Eleanor first appeared to buy supplies with the last of her money, a leaden silence fell. Everyone stopped what they were doing to stare. Old Martha, a woman with hair as white as snow and a face wrinkled like a raisin, was the only one who approached. "You're the woman who's moved into Vincent's mill?" Eleanor confirmed. The old woman slowly made the sign of the cross. "May God have mercy on your soul, child." At the general store, the owner, Mr. Anselm, a thin man with a drooping mustache, sold her what she asked for, but charged her more than the usual prices. Eleanor noticed, but didn't argue. She wasn't in a position to. As she was leaving, Anselm called out, "Ma'am, just a word of advice. Don't stay in that place when the wind blows hard. They say that's when things happen." Eleanor asked what things. The man didn't answer, just shrugged and went back behind the counter. It was old Martha who told her the full story. She appeared at the mill 2 days later, carrying a basket with bread and a piece of smoked sausage. A neighbourly offering, she said, though her house was nearly half a league away. They sat on what Eleanor was trying to turn into a porch. The children played by the creek under their mother's watchful eye, and the old woman told her tale. Vincent Vance had arrived in St. Peter's Falls in 1850, coming from Charleston. A man in his 30s, strong, skilled, who knew about construction and mechanics. He bought the land cheap and built the stone mill with his own hands, aided by hired laborers. Within 3 years, the mill was operational. It ground wheat and corn for the entire region. A prosperous business. Vincent never married but lived well. He was respected, went to church every Sunday, paid fairly. Didn't drink too much, didn't pick fights, kept to himself. But he had his eccentricities. He received strange visitors late at night, men who arrived on horseback, stayed for a few hours and left. He often traveled to Richmond and always returned at night. He built the 3rd floor of the mill and kept the access locked. No one went up there. He spent entire nights writing by lamplight. When asked what he was writing, he said it was engineering calculations. He grew more withdrawn over the years. Stranger. On the night of March 12, 1873, a violent storm descended upon St. Peter's Falls. A wind like no one had ever seen. It tore off roofs, felled trees, killed livestock. The wind howled like a living creature in agony. And from Vincent's mill came sounds, screams, some said. Others swore they heard cracks like gunfire. Still others spoke of strange lights dancing in the windows. When the storm passed and day broke, Vincent Vance had vanished. The mill door was open, banging in the wind. The water wheel was still. There were signs of a struggle in the main room. A table overturned, a chair broken, blood on the floor. But only a little blood, not enough for a death. They searched, they scoured the woods, they questioned everyone in the village and beyond. Nothing. Vincent Vance had disappeared like smoke. The family was notified. Michael Vance, Vincent's only son who had been raised by his deceased mother in Charleston, came to St. Peter's Falls. A terrified man in his early 20s who had never been close to his father. He collected the few personal belongings, locked up the mill, registered the property and left. He never returned. He died in Richmond in 1871, 20 years later, leaving the mill in his will to a granddaughter he barely knew. During those 18 years, 4 families had tried to live in the place. The first lasted 11 days. They complained of strange sounds at night, whispers coming from the walls, the feeling of being watched, terrible nightmares every night. The second family, more skeptical, lasted 3 weeks. Their eldest son became obsessed with exploring the mill. He started having violent fits of rage. He tried to kill his own father with a scythe. The family fled. The third family, just an elderly couple, stayed for 5 days. The wife swore she saw the shadow of a man in the mill's attic every night. The husband found scratches on the walls that hadn't been there before. They left without looking back. The fourth family barely made it inside. As soon as they opened the door and smelled the air, the mother fainted. They said it was an evil presence. Devoutly religious, they blessed everything, threw holy water, prayed the rosary. It was no use. They didn't even stay one night. For 13 years since then, no one had tried. The mill stood there, deteriorating, swallowed by the wilderness, becoming a legend. The village children dared each other to see who could get the closest. Adults avoided the road after dark. The stories grew. They said Vincent had hidden a fortune stolen from smugglers. They said he'd made a pact with the devil to get rich. They said he was murdered by his own criminal partners and buried somewhere in the woods. They said the mill was a gateway to hell. They said many things. No one knew for sure. But everyone agreed on one thing. The place was marked. Old Martha finished her story, looked at Eleanor with deep eyes full of genuine concern and said, "My child, I know you have nowhere to go. I know you're desperate. But this place, it has something in it. I knew Vincent personally when I was a girl. He wasn't a bad man, but he was involved in things he shouldn't have been. And he left something here, something that doesn't want to be forgotten. If you're really going to stay, be careful, especially when the wind blows hard from the southeast. That's when things happen. Eleanor thanked her for the food and the warning, but said she had no alternative. She was going to stay. She was going to make it work. Old Martha sighed, blessed Eleanor and the children, and left, shaking her head. That night, for the first time, Eleanor went up to the mill. She had avoided it until then, too busy fixing the house. But the old woman's story had awakened something. Curiosity, perhaps, or the need to understand what she had truly inherited. She left the children sleeping, took a lantern, and opened the heavy mill door, which groaned on its rusted hinges. The ground floor was enormous. Thick stone walls, a high ceiling supported by dark wooden beams. The hydraulic mechanism took up much of the space. The water wheel was connected by a thick axle that passed through the wall into the mill. Large wooden and metal gears, chains, pulleys, all still, all covered in decades of rust and dust, the smell of old metal, musty wood, and dampness. A wooden staircase led to the first floor. Eleanor climbed slowly, testing each step. Several were rotten, nearly giving way under her weight. The first floor was where the grinding happened. Large, circular millstones that once crushed grain were now cracked and covered in moss. Wooden bins for storing flour were now empty and eaten by termites. Window frames without glass let in the cold wind. Another, narrower staircase led to the second floor. The second floor was smaller, an attic with a sloped ceiling following the shape of the roof. This was where Vincent stored tools, empty sacks, and various equipment. There was also a small bed against one wall, so the miller sometimes slept here. A crude table with a chair, an old lantern still on the table, and something that made Eleanor stop, a wooden chest in the darkest corner. The lantern trembled in her hand as she approached. The chest was old, bound in iron, with an iron lock, but the lock was broken, the lid ajar. Eleanor took a deep breath and opened it. Inside, folded carefully, was a white shirt, stained yellow by time, a pair of thick cloth trousers, leather suspenders, strange tools, a round metal object that looked like a broken compass, another object of metal and glass that Eleanor didn't recognize, and underneath it all, wrapped in oilcloth, was a journal. She carefully removed the journal. The cover was worn brown leather, stamped with a crest that looked like a stylized ship. She opened the first page. The weak light of the lantern illuminated elegant calligraphy, firm letters traced in black ink that had faded to brown over the years. "For whomever the wind may bring," was written at the top, and below, in larger letters, Vincent Vance, in the year of our Lord, 1873. Eleanor turned the pages slowly. There were 87 in all, numbered in the corner. Each page was a chaotic mix of text. Archaic English, a few phrases in Latin, scattered numbers that could be dates or coordinates, technical drawings of gears and mechanisms, sketches of maps that didn't correspond to any place Eleanor knew, strange symbols, geometric diagrams. And repeated throughout several pages, always written in the margin, was a phrase she could understand. "Listen to what the wind sings when it blows from the side where the sun sleeps." Eleanor sat in the old chair, which groaned under her weight. She placed the lantern on the table. She began trying to decipher the contents, but it made no sense. The pages seemed to be out of order. One spoke of grinding wheat. The next had complex mathematical equations. The next described the location of stars. Then came a list of names Eleanor didn't know. Then a detailed drawing of the water wheel's mechanism. Then a text in Latin she couldn't read. She spent more than an hour there, turning pages, trying to find a pattern. She noticed that each page had, in the corner, besides the number, a small drawing. Some had a circle with an arrow pointing up. Others, a circle with an arrow pointing left. Still others had symbols that looked like a stylized compass rose. Was it a code or just decoration? A noise from below made her freeze. Footsteps, creaking wood. Her heart hammered. The children. She stood up too quickly, knocking over the chair, and scrambled down the stairs, crossing the dark mill, lighting her way with the dangerously swaying lantern. She burst through the door and ran to the house. Peter and Laura were sleeping soundly, wrapped in each other's arms. Nothing had happened. Eleanor leaned against the wall, breathing heavily, a hand on her chest, trying to calm her heart. Just the sound of old wood, just the wind, just her imagination. But she took the journal back to the house anyway. She hid it inside her trunk of clothes. She didn't know why, but she felt that it was important. Very important. The following days fell into an exhausting routine. Eleanor woke with the rising sun, heated water to wash the children, and made a simple meal of cornmeal and salt, and when she was lucky, a bit of lard or salt pork she could buy in the village. Peter was becoming far too responsible for his age. He helped without complaint, looked after his sister, and explored the surrounding area for wild berries. Laura was calmer, getting used to it. She hummed to herself, played with pebbles, and drew pictures in the dirt with a stick. Eleanor tried to take in sewing work, but it was hard to find clients. The women of St. Peter's Falls avoided her. They said clothes sewn by someone living in that marked place were cursed. She managed to get only 3 jobs: hemming a skirt, mending a shirt, sewing a torn sheet. They paid little and reluctantly, but Eleanor took whatever she could get. She had no choice. At night, after the children were asleep, she would take out the journal and try to decipher it. She showed it to Peter, who could read better than she could. The boy was fascinated. He managed to translate a few Latin words with the little the Reverend had taught him. Rosa Ventorum, compass rose, coordinates, north, south, east, west, degrees, measurements. They began to work together, mother and son, trying to piece together the impossible puzzle left by a great-grandfather neither of them had ever known. And it was on the afternoon of the 6th day, an afternoon with a particularly strong wind blowing from the southeast, that everything changed. Laura was playing alone near the mill. Eleanor was sewing on the improvised porch. Peter was fetching water from the creek. Suddenly Laura stopped, tilted her head to the side and shouted, "Mama, who's talking?" Eleanor shot to her feet. She ran to her daughter. "What did you say, my child?" Laura pointed to the mill. "There's someone talking in there. They're talking real quiet, but I can hear them." Eleanor strained her ears. At first only the wind, but then, as she paid closer attention, she noticed it. A sound, low, constant, coming from the structures of the mill. It wasn't quite a voice. It was more like a whisper or a murmur or a distant song, a sound that varied in pitch, rising and falling, forming a hypnotic rhythmic pattern. Peter came running. He heard it too. "Mama, that's strange. Where is it coming from?" Eleanor approached the mill slowly. The sound became clearer. It was coming from above, from the mechanism, from the blades of the water wheel. The strong wind hitting the wooden and metal structures made everything vibrate. And this vibration produced sounds, different tones depending on which part was vibrating. And together, these tones formed something almost musical, almost like a whispering voice. Eleanor entered the mill, climbing to the first floor where she had better access to the water wheel. The sound was louder there, almost deafening. The wind whistled through the gaps in the enormous gears, making the rusted metal sing. It wasn't just random noise. There was a pattern, a sequence that repeated, from low to high, then back again. Pauses, repetition. Peter climbed up behind her. They stood there, mother and son, listening. 5 minutes, 10. Eleanor's mind was working quickly. Vincent had written, "Listen to what the wind sings when it blows from the side where the sun sleeps. The sun sleeps in the west. The wind comes from the east, the southeast, more specifically." He knew this. He built the mill in this position. Did he create this sound on purpose? "Mama," Peter whispered, "that doesn't sound like music. It sounds like someone trying to talk." Eleanor felt a shiver run up her arms. He was right. If she concentrated, if she ignored the fact that it was wind and metal, she could almost hear syllables, the rhythm of speech. She couldn't understand the words, but the intent was there. They went back down. Eleanor grabbed the journal. She searched for the pages that mentioned the wind. She found 3. One had a drawing of the mill with arrows indicating the wind's direction. Another had a sequence of numbers and musical symbols. The third, the last in the journal, page 87, had a more legible text. The metal speaks when the wind is its interpreter. The tones are no accident. They are a map. Listen 3 times at sunset. Record the tones. Translate by the rose. The path will open. Eleanor reread it 3 times. She didn't fully understand, but an image was beginning to form. Vincent had created a code using the sounds produced by the wind in the mill. A code that needed to be heard, memorized and translated using a compass, rose as a key. But translated to what? To find what? For the next 3 days, whenever the wind blew hard from the southeast, Eleanor would go up to the mill and listen. She tried to memorize the sequence of tones. Peter helped. They would stay there, mother and son, while Laura played below under their supervision. They tried to turn the sounds into symbols. A low sound was a circle, a high sound was a triangle, a medium sound was a square. They assembled a sequence. They compared it to the drawings in the journal. And on the afternoon of the 9th day, Eleanor had an insight. The pages were numbered 1 to 87, but the order wasn't chronological. It was a reading order based on something else. She took all the pages that had a drawing of a compass rose, pointing to the southeast. There were 12 of them. She put them in order. The text began to make sense. Vincent had written an instruction manual, but he had shuffled it all to protect the information. She spent the entire night rearranging the pages. Peter fell asleep at the table next to her, his head resting on his arms. Laura slept on the makeshift bed. Eleanor worked by the light of the lantern, her eyes burning, her fingers stained with old ink that came off the paper. When the sun began to rise, she had assembled a coherent sequence, 30 pages that formed a continuous text, and what she read made the world stand still. Vincent Vance wasn't just a miller. For 23 years, he had secretly worked as a middleman for a network of smugglers who were diverting gold from federal shipments. Dangerous men who paid well, but would kill without hesitation anyone who became a problem. Vincent received payments in gold and precious stones, but he couldn't deposit them in banks. He couldn't spend them openly, so he saved it. And it accumulated. For years. With the knowledge he had brought from working at the port in Charleston in his youth, knowledge of navigation and engineering, Vincent had created an ingenious system of hiding places within the very structure of the mill. Secret compartments in the blades of the water wheel, an underground chamber beneath the hydraulic mechanism, an iron safe embedded in the stone wall. Each hiding place was locked in such a way that it could only be accessed by setting specific mechanisms to exact positions, and to ensure that someone in his family could one day find it, in case he died, Vincent created the sound code. He carved microscopic notches into the metal gears. When a strong wind blew and made everything vibrate, the notches created a specific tonal pattern. This pattern, when translated using knowledge of navigation and polar coordinates, revealed the exact location of the hiding places. Eleanor finished reading with trembling hands. Her heart was beating so hard it hurt her chest. It was all real. The legend was true. Her great-grandfather had really hidden a fortune, and he had left a sound map for his descendants to find it. But why did he disappear? The last page Eleanor had organized had the answer. Vincent discovered that the smugglers were planning to kill him to avoid sharing the profits and to eliminate a witness. So he pretended not to know anything, hid everything, and on the night of the storm he fled. He staged a fight to make it look like a kidnapping or murder, but in reality he escaped. He went to Charleston, where he died years later without ever revealing the truth. He left everything to his descendants through a coded will. Eleanor sat motionless as the morning light streamed through the glassless window. Her daughter began to stir in bed. Peter opened his eyes, still confused and sleepy, and Eleanor looked at them. She looked at the miserable house. She looked at her own calloused hands. She looked at the mill outside. Within those stone walls, hidden for 18 years, was enough gold to change everything. But first, she had to find it. 3 weeks had passed since Eleanor discovered the complete journal and deciphered the first clues left by Vincent. 3 weeks of obsessive work that had transformed the thin, desperate widow into an even thinner woman, with eyes sunken from sleepless nights, but with a new gleam of determination that bordered on mania. The mill was no longer just a cursed place she had accepted out of necessity. It was now a gigantic puzzle she had to solve, a treasure map that promised either salvation or madness, depending on how far she could go. The routine she established was as rigid as a religious ritual. Eleanor would wake before the sun, prepare a thin cornmeal porridge for the children, and wash clothes in the frigid creek that left her hands red and chapped. In the mornings, she sewed when she had work, which was rare because the women of the village still avoided commissioning services from someone who lived in the marked place. Peter had become his mother's official assistant in the investigation of the mill. The 9-year-old boy spent entire afternoons studying the reorganized journal, making notes with charcoal on pieces of board because paper was an impossible luxury. Laura, too young to understand the treasure hunt, helped in her own way. She picked wildflowers that grew at the edge of the woods and placed them in old tin cans scattered around the house, trying to bring color and life to the grey place. But it was in the afternoons, when the wind blew hard from the southeast, that the real routine took place. Eleanor and Peter would go up to the mill, position themselves near the water wheel's mechanism, and listen. They listened with the intensity of someone trying to decipher a code in a foreign language. The metallic whisper produced by the wind on the etched gears had become the constant soundtrack of their lives. Peter could now identify individual tones, the deep sound from the largest gear, the high-pitched sound from the side chain, the medium sound from the smaller pulleys. Together, they formed a sequence that repeated with each strong gust of wind. Eleanor mentally noted everything, as she hadn't yet managed to turn the sounds into usable coordinates. The village had noticed the change in her behavior. Gossip spread like wildfire through dry grass. They said the widow was going mad, just like her great-grandfather, that she spent entire days inside the mill talking to herself, that the boy was being dragged into the same madness, that the little girl was dirty and neglected because her mother only thought about fantasies. Old Martha would visit twice a week, bringing food and concern. She would sit with Eleanor, hold her calloused hands, and ask in a gentle voice if everything was all right. Eleanor would lie and say yes. The old woman didn't believe her, but didn't press. She would just leave a basket of bread, eggs when she had them, a piece of dried meat and go, making the sign of the cross. Reverend August appeared one afternoon under a sky heavy with the threat of a storm. He came on a mission to save souls, according to himself. He found Eleanor and Peter in the mill, their heads tilted up, listening to the wind. The clergyman stood at the door, observing with evident discomfort before clearing his throat loudly to announce his presence. Eleanor descended the wooden stairs that groaned with each step. "Reverend," she said with cool politeness. The man entered, clutching a prayer book to his chest like a shield. "I came to see how you are, my child. The people in the village are worried. They say you spend your days exploring this place, that you've become obsessed with strange ideas." Eleanor crossed her arms over her dust-stained apron. "With all due respect, Reverend, what I do on my own property is not the business of the village." The clergyman frowned. "Your soul is God's business, and I am the shepherd of these souls. This place has a dark history. Mr. Vincent was involved in things that displeased the Lord. The curse that hangs over these stones cannot be broken by human curiosity. The only salvation lies in abandoning this place and seeking a Christian life elsewhere." Peter appeared at the top of the stairs, watching the discussion with eyes too sharp for his age. Eleanor felt anger boiling in her stomach, anger at the reverend who came to judge, anger at the village that spread gossip instead of helping, anger at God, who had allowed her husband to be crushed to death, leaving her and her children in misery. "Reverend August," she said, her voice controlled but firm, "I appreciate your concern, but I will not abandon the only roof I have. If God wanted me to have a better option, he would have provided one. Since he has not, I will work with what I have. And if that includes exploring the property I legally inherited, then that is what I will do." The Reverend opened his mouth to argue. Eleanor held up a hand, cutting him off. "And another thing, Reverend, when I came to the church for help after my husband died, I received $5. 5. It was barely enough to buy food for a week. I don't need my soul saved anymore. I need food, clothes, and a future for my children. If you can help with that, you are welcome. Otherwise, I thank you for your visit, but I have work to do." The clergyman turned red. He considered responding with the authority that men of the cloth believe they possess. But something in Eleanor's eyes, something dangerous there, of a woman with nothing left to lose, made him back down. "May God have mercy on your soul, my child. When the devil's temptation comes disguised as easy fortune, remember that greed leads to perdition." He left with brisk steps, his black cassock billowing in the strengthening wind. Peter came down the stairs and stood beside his mother. "They don't understand, do they, Mama?" Eleanor ran a hand through her son's sweaty hair. "No, my love, they don't, but they don't have to. We just need to keep going." It was that very night, with a storm beating down on the patched roof, that Eleanor finally made the breakthrough she had been searching for. She had reorganized the journal pages for the 20th time, now focusing on the technical drawings that showed the internal mechanism of the water wheel. Vincent had drawn every gear, every axle, every pulley, and on one of the drawings there was a sequence of small numbers written along the outline of the parts. Eleanor had noticed them before, but thought they were construction measurements. Now, illuminated by a flickering lantern as rain hammered outside, she had a different insight. She took the page with the sequence of tones that Peter had noted. She compared it with the numbers on the drawing. Each tone corresponded to a number. The deep sound was a 1. The high-pitched sound was a 9. The intermediate sounds were numbers in between. The sequence they heard repeatedly when the southeast wind blew was 3, 7, 1, 9, 4, 4, 3, 2. Eleanor flipped through the pages frantically, looking for what to do with these numbers. She found it on a page that had previously made no sense. The coordinates are not degrees of the earth. They are the miller's paces. From the marked stone. The marked stone? Eleanor shot up so fast she knocked over her chair. Peter woke with a start. "Mama?" She was already grabbing a lantern and a shawl. "Come with me, now!" The boy didn't question. He pulled a shirt on over his nightclothes and followed his mother outside. The rain had eased to a fine drizzle. The wind was still strong. They entered the mill. Eleanor shone the light on the dirt floor of the ground level, searching for a stone that was different. Peter helped. 15 minutes of searching before the boy shouted, "Mama, here!" In the southeast corner, partially covered by dirt accumulated over the years, was a rectangular stone with a symbol carved into it, a stylized cross within a circle, the same mark that was in Vincent's journal. Eleanor knelt, clearing the dirt with her hands. The stone was large, heavy, but not part of the foundation. It was loose. With Peter's help, they managed to move it aside, revealing a square hole underneath. It was too dark to see what was inside. Eleanor lowered the lantern. The light revealed an empty space about 2 feet deep, and at the bottom, a large bundle wrapped in oiled canvas and tied with rope. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear the pulse in her own ears. Peter gripped his mother's arm tightly. "It's real, Mama. It's all real." Her hand trembling, she reached down and grabbed the bundle. It was heavy, very heavy. She pulled it up with an effort. She set it on the ground. The two of them looked at each other in the dense silence, broken only by the wind outside. Eleanor untied the rope with fingers that seemed to disobey her. She unfolded the canvas. Inside was a dark wooden box, locked with a simple padlock, already consumed by rust. Eleanor smashed the padlock against a stone 3 times until it broke. She lifted the lid, and she saw it. Gold coins, dozens of them, stacked in neat rows, each individually wrapped in thin cloth to prevent scratching. The lantern light reflected off the precious metal, creating a golden glow that seemed to illuminate the entire mill. Peter let out a strangled sound, half laugh, half sob. Eleanor picked up a coin with a hand that trembled violently. It was real, solid, heavy. Real gold. She turned it over, seeing the Federal Eagle stamped on one side and the date on the other, 1854. She counted quickly. 15 coins in all. A small fortune. It wasn't everything Vincent had hidden. The journal made it clear there was more, much more. But 15 gold coins were enough to buy a decent house, clothes for the children, food for months, tools for her trade. It was enough to change everything immediately. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling hot tears run down her dirt-streaked face. Behind her closed eyelids, she saw possibilities. She saw Peter attending a real school. She saw Laura in a new dress with no patches. She saw herself no longer having to beg for sewing work. She saw their dignity restored, but along with the relief came something else. A weight. Because Eleanor knew where this gold had come from. Vincent had written it clearly. Gold diverted from federal shipments. Stolen from smugglers who had in turn stolen it. Money stained with crime, greed, probably blood. The last page of the journal hammered in her memory. This gold was stolen from thieves who stole from the people. Whoever finds it must use it for the people, not for themselves. Otherwise, the curse is not of the place, but of the conscience. Peter touched his mother's shoulder. "We found it, Mama. We really found it. What do we do now?" Eleanor opened her eyes. She looked at her son. She looked at the gold. She looked at her own calloused, dirty, trembling hands. She made a decision. "We'll use these coins only for emergencies, only for what we desperately need. The rest we still have to find. And when we find it all, then I'll decide what to do. For now, this is an absolute secret. No one can know, not even old Martha, no one. Do you understand?" Peter nodded gravely. "I understand, Mama." They wrapped the 15 coins back up, placed the box in the hiding spot, covered it with the marked stone, and disguised it with dirt. Eleanor kept just 1 coin. She tucked it inside her bodice against her skin. They returned to the house, soaked from the drizzle and trembling with a mixture of adrenaline, fear, and hope. Laura was fast asleep, oblivious to it all. Eleanor and Peter sat on the edge of the makeshift bed, looking at each other in the dark. "We did it, Mama," he whispered. "We found Great-Grandpa's treasure." Eleanor pulled her son into a tight hug. "Yes, we did, my love. But this is just the beginning. The hard part is still to come." For the next 2 days, Eleanor existed in a state of nervous agitation that she tried to hide from the children, but couldn't completely. She needed to go to the village to exchange 1 coin for currency. But how could she do it without raising suspicion? A gold coin wasn't a common sight. The shopkeepers would ask questions. People would talk. She needed a convincing story. She thought of saying she'd found it buried in the yard. No, too obvious. She thought of saying it was an inheritance from her mother. Better, more believable. On the morning of the third day, she put on her least shabby dress, tied her hair in a firm bun, and washed her face until her skin ached. She left the children with strict orders to stay inside the house. She walked to St. Peter's Falls with the gold coin hidden inside her right boot, wrapped in a sock so it wouldn't jingle. The hour-long walk felt like it took an entire day. Every person she passed on the dusty road seemed to stare at her with suspicion. Every sound of a twig snapping in the woods made her heart leap, thinking it was a thief following her. But she reached the village whole and intact. Mr. Anselm's general store was the hub of the community. It sold fabric, kerosene, flour, beans, tools, practically everything the small town needed. Eleanor entered, trying to seem casual. "Good morning, Mr. Anselm." The thin man with the drooping moustache greeted her with cool politeness. "Mrs. Vance, what can I do for you?" She pretended to look at the bolts of fabric on a shelf. "I need to buy a few things. Flour, a bit of salt pork if you have it, some cloth to make clothes for the children, sewing thread too, and soap." Anselm mentally tallied it up. "That'll be about $12. Do you have it?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "I do." And she pulled out the gold coin. The silence that fell over the store was absolute. Two women chatting in the corner stopped mid-sentence and stared. A boy sweeping the floor froze with his broom in mid-air. Anselm took the coin slowly, as if picking up a venomous snake. He took it to the window to examine it in the light. He turned it over and over. "This is real gold. Where did you get this?" Eleanor kept her voice steady. "It was my mother's, an inheritance I'd saved. I need to use it now." The shopkeeper didn't look convinced. "You know a coin like this is worth much more than $12, don't you? It's worth $80, maybe $90, easy." Eleanor feigned surprise. "Really? I had no idea. Well, if it's worth that much, then you can give me the $12 worth of goods and 70 more in cash. Is that possible?" Anselm hesitated. "I don't have $70 here. I can give you the 12 in goods and 40 in cash. That's all I have." Eleanor pretended to consider it. Inside, her heart was racing. "All right, that will do." The man gathered the goods, took money from the small safe he kept under the counter, and counted it out bill by bill. Eleanor put everything in a cloth sack. The two women in the corner were whispering, staring openly. As Eleanor was leaving, Anselm called out, "Mrs. Vance, where did you say you got this?" She turned and met his gaze directly. "I already told you. It was my mother's. I have a right to use my own inheritance, don't I?" The man didn't answer. Eleanor walked out with her head held high, but her legs trembling. It didn't take 2 hours for the news to spread through all of St. Peter's Falls. The widow from the cursed mill had shown up with a gold coin. Some said it was an old coin. Others said it looked like the kind smugglers used. Old Martha heard the gossip second-hand and went straight to the mill. She found Eleanor cutting new fabric to make clothes for the children. "My child, we need to talk." They sat on the porch. The old woman didn't beat around the bush. "Where did you get the gold?" Eleanor told the lie about her mother's inheritance. Martha shook her head slowly. "Lies don't look good on you, child. I knew your mother. The poor woman died without a penny to her name. She had no gold. That gold came from here. You found something in the mill." Eleanor felt the anchor of her lie sinking. She looked at the old woman who had always been kind, who had always brought food, who had never judged her maliciously. She took a risk. "I did. Vincent left it hidden. The journal I found had a map." Old Martha closed her eyes as if in physical pain. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. So it's true. The fortune is real. How much did you find? Eleanor said it was just that, 15 coins. The old woman asked if there was more. Eleanor lied, saying she didn't know. Martha gripped her hands with the force of someone holding a person back from a cliff's edge. Listen to me, Eleanor. You have to be very, very careful. This news will get to Sebastian Thorne, and when it does, he will come, and it will be dangerous. That man is capable of anything for money. You need to protect yourself. But how? Eleanor asked, real desperation in her voice. How do I protect myself from him? I have no one. The old woman was silent for a moment, thinking. Finally, she spoke. There's Thomas Forrester, the carpenter, a good man. His father worked with your great-grandfather years ago. He lives alone on a small homestead on the other side of the village, lost his family a long time ago, keeps to himself, but he's a trustworthy man. If I ask him, he'll come help. Eleanor didn't know if she could trust anyone else, but Martha was right about one thing: Thorne would come. And when he did, she wouldn't be able to defend herself alone. The old woman's prophecy came true faster than Eleanor could have imagined. 3 days later, in the late afternoon, under a clear sky with a warm wind, a noisy cavalcade announced visitors. Eleanor was in the yard, trying to clear large stones to make a vegetable garden. Peter was helping. Laura was playing with a straw doll. The sound of horses made Eleanor stop, her hoe in mid-air. She knew who it was before she saw them. Sebastian Thorne appeared around the bend in the road, accompanied by 2 large, scowling men with machetes hanging at their waists, hired thugs. The 3 men dismounted without asking permission. Thorne approached Eleanor with a false smile stretched across his pudgy face. He looked around, his eyes assessing everything. Mrs. Vance, what a surprise to find you working so diligently in this place. I heard you had a bit of luck, found a valuable inheritance from your mother. Eleanor gripped the hoe tighter, feeling the wooden handle dig into her palm. That's none of your business, Sebastian. He laughed without humor. Oh, but it is. You see, I have documents, properly filed with the county, proving that I've purchased the right of way on the land surrounding your property. Technically, to leave this place, you must pass through my land, and I can charge a toll or deny passage completely. Peter moved closer to his mother. The thugs laughed, seeing a 9-year-old boy trying to look protective. Thorne continued. Furthermore, the creek that powers your mill originates on my land, upstream. I can divert the water's course. I can dry your mill up completely. Eleanor felt ice in her veins, but kept her voice steady. You can't do any of that. It's illegal. The landowner shrugged. Illegal according to whom? The sheriff is my cousin. The judge is my crony. Who do you think they're going to believe? A crazy widow living in a cursed place, or a respectable local landowner? He took another step closer. The thugs positioned themselves on either side, creating a threatening triangle. Look, Eleanor, I'll be generous. You show me where you got that gold. We split whatever there is, 50-50, and everyone stays happy. You secure your children's future, and I make sure no one bothers you again. Simple as that. Eleanor spat on the ground between them. This is the 2nd time you've offered me a disgusting deal, and the answer is the same. Get off my land. Sebastian's smile vanished. You wretched woman, you really don't learn, do you? He signaled to his men. The 2 men advanced. Peter shouted. Laura started to cry. Eleanor raised the hoe, ready to fight, even though she knew she had no chance. And it was at that moment that a deep voice came from the road. I think you'd best stop right there. Everyone turned. A tall man with broad shoulders and a grizzled beard was walking towards them, a carpenter's axe resting on his shoulder. Old Martha was behind him, small and elderly, but with a determined expression. Sebastian narrowed his eyes. Thomas Forrester, what do you want here? The carpenter stopped about 10 feet away, a safe but not threatening distance. "I heard Vincent Vance's granddaughter was living here, came to offer my help with repairs." Thorne scoffed. "Help? She can barely afford to pay you." Thomas shrugged. "I didn't ask for payment. Vincent's family helped my family in the past. I'm paying a moral debt. Now, if you have no further business here, I suggest you all leave. It's getting dark, and the road is treacherous after nightfall." The thugs looked to Sebastian, waiting for an order. The landowner assessed the situation. 3 against 1 would be easy, but Thomas had an axe and the posture of a man who knew how to use it. Old Martha was a witness, and assaulting a respected carpenter from the village could cause problems, even with a bought-off sheriff and judge. He retreated strategically. "Fine, I'm leaving, but this isn't over, Eleanor. You have 1 week to think about my offer. 1 week, then I'll be back. And next time, I won't be so polite." He mounted his horse, signaled for his men to follow, and they galloped off, kicking up red dust that hung in the air like a bloody mist. Eleanor dropped the hoe. Her legs went weak. Thomas moved quickly and grabbed her arm before she could fall. "Breathe slowly, it's over." Old Martha hugged the children. Laura was sobbing. Peter was pale but trying to be strong. Eleanor looked at the carpenter she'd never seen before. "Why did you come?" Thomas gently released her arm. "Old Martha came to me, told me about your situation. My father, God rest his soul, worked with Vincent Vance right here at this mill. Vincent saved him from a false accusation that could have cost him his life. I owe everything my father taught me, everything I am, to this family. When Martha said his granddaughter was in trouble, I came to help. You don't have to pay me. I don't want anything in return. I just want to fix what needs fixing and help keep you safe." Eleanor felt tears burning in her eyes. For the first time in months, someone was offering genuine help without expecting anything in return. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't even know what to say." Thomas gave a small, half smile. "You don't have to say anything. I'll start tomorrow morning. I'll bring tools, lumber. This mill needs a lot of work, and so does this house." Martha, ever practical, went inside the house and started brewing tea with herbs from her own garden. The 5 of them sat on the porch as night fell. Peter looked at Thomas with the admiration of a boy who hadn't had a male figure since his father died. Laura had stopped crying and was watching the carpenter with curiosity. Thomas asked about the situation. Eleanor, tired of lying and feeling she could trust them, told them everything. The journal, the sound code. The first discovery, the 15 coins, Sebastian's threat. The carpenter listened to it all in silence, processing. When she finished, he spoke slowly, weighing each word. "My father, before he died, left me a piece of paper with strange notes on it, numbers and words I never understood. He said he got it from Vincent and that one day it would be important. I've kept it all these years without knowing what it meant. I can bring it tomorrow, and you can see if it makes any sense." Eleanor nodded. "It might help. The more information we have, the better." Martha served tea in old mugs. They talked until the moon appeared in the sky. Thomas told them about the wife and son he had lost 5 years ago to the typhoid fever that had swept through the region. He told them how he had isolated himself since then, working obsessively to avoid thinking about his loss. Eleanor felt a connection. She too knew the loneliness of losing a loved one. She too knew the emptiness of days that seemed to have no purpose beyond survival. When Martha and Thomas finally left, it was late. Peter helped his mother lock the doors, placing boards across them as extra protection. The 3 of them lay down together on the makeshift bed. Laura fell asleep first, exhausted from crying. Peter held his mother's hand. "Are we going to be okay, Mama? Are we going to make it?" Eleanor kissed her son's forehead. "Yes, my love. We have help now." But But in the dark, staring at the hole-ridden ceiling through which she could see the stars, she wasn't so sure. Sebastian would be back, and when he returned, it would be worse. If you're enjoying this story, please leave a like and share it with someone who needs to believe there's always a second chance, even in the darkest of times. Thomas appeared the next morning carrying tools in a canvas bag and planks tied to a mule. He began to work, assessing what needed urgent repair. The roof had large holes. The walls had sections where the wattle and daub was exposed. The door was warped. The windows needed shutters. He worked in silence, focused, his large, skilled hands moving with precision. Peter was fascinated. He asked to help. Thomas accepted and began teaching the boy how to hold a hammer correctly, how to drive a nail at the right angle, how to measure wood before cutting. The boy absorbed everything with the thirst of one starved for both knowledge and a masculine presence. Eleanor watched them while she sewed patches on old clothes. She noticed how Peter blossomed around the carpenter, how the boy laughed, asked questions, and tried to imitate Thomas's movements. And she noticed how Thomas himself changed. The weight of loneliness on his broad shoulders seemed to lighten when he was teaching. The deep sadness in his eyes cleared when Peter managed to do something right, and the boy shouted with joy. Laura had also taken a liking to him. She followed Thomas everywhere, offering him flowers she had picked, bringing him water when she saw he was thirsty. The carpenter treated her with such natural kindness that it was impossible not to see he missed his own lost daughter. In the afternoon, when the sun was less fierce, Thomas pulled a yellowed envelope from his shirt pocket. "I brought the paper I told you about, the one my father left." Eleanor took it carefully. It was an old, stained sheet with the shaky handwriting of someone who was either old or ill when they wrote it. But she recognized the hand. It was the same as in Vincent's journal. "My God, your father was right. This is from Vincent." The paper had a sequence of numbers: 23, 45, 67, 12, 89, 34, 56, 78. Below it, a phrase in Latin that Eleanor didn't understand. And in the corner, a small drawing of a water wheel with an arrow pointing down. Peter brought the reorganized journal. They compared them. The numbers corresponded perfectly to one of the coded sequences that Eleanor hadn't been able to decipher. With Thomas's paper as the key, the sequence made sense. They were instructions for accessing the second hiding place, the one located beneath the water wheel, the underground chamber Vincent had mentioned. The three of them, Eleanor, Peter and Thomas, just looked at one another. Thomas broke the silence. "Do you want to check?" Eleanor hesitated. Checking meant finding more gold. More gold meant more responsibility, more temptation, more danger. But it also meant the possibility of truly changing everything, of not just surviving, but thriving, of giving her children a decent future. She made a decision. "We'll check, but only the three of us know. And when we find it, if we find it, we'll decide together what to do." They worked until nightfall. Thomas had to dismantle part of the water wheel's external mechanism. It was a complex task because the structure was fragile with rust and rot. Peter helped by holding tools and removing rusted bolts. Eleanor kept watch, nervous that someone might appear. Laura fell asleep in a corner on a pile of old sacks. When the moon was high and the night completely dark, lit only by 2 lanterns, they managed to access the base of the water wheel. There, exactly where the drawing indicated, they found a stone that was not part of the original construction. Thomas used a crowbar to move it. It revealed a narrow hole descending into darkness. A smell of damp earth and mold rose up. Thomas tied a rope to a strong beam and tested if it would hold his weight. He went down first. Eleanor passed him a lantern. She heard him moving around below, the sound of dripping water, his heavy breathing. Finally, a muffled voice came up. "There's something down here? Pass me the rope. I'll tie it on." They hoisted it up together. The weight was considerable. When the shape emerged from the hole, they saw it was a metal chest, smaller than the first, but heavier, covered in mud and rust, locked with a padlock that Thomas broke with a single sharp blow from a hammer. They opened it. Inside, more gold coins. Many more. Also stones that glittered even in the dim light. Emeralds, Eleanor recognized, having once seen one in a wealthy lady's ring. And documents, rolled up and protected in a sealed metal tube. Eleanor took the tube with trembling hands. She opened it. She unrolled the papers. They were ledgers, names, dates, quantities, a logbook of the smuggling operations. Vincent had kept a meticulous record of every transaction. Every gram of gold received, every precious stone, who it came from, where it was supposed to go. But the last page, dated March 10th, 1873, 2 days before his disappearance, had a different kind of text. I have discovered they plan to kill me. Stephen and James have conspired to divide everything between them and eliminate the witnesses. I am a witness. I will feign ignorance, hide everything, and disappear. May this gold, born of greed and bathed in sin, be found only by one with a heart pure enough to use it not for themselves, but to heal the wounds that greed has caused. The silence that fell was so dense, it felt solid. Thomas was the first to speak. So he wasn't killed. He escaped. Eleanor nodded slowly. And he left everything for a family member to find. But only if they had the right heart. Peter, sitting on the mud-caked floor, asked in a small voice, "Do we have the right heart, Mama?" Eleanor looked at her son. She looked at the gold. She looked at Thomas. She looked at Laura, sleeping innocently. "I don't know, my son. I truly don't know." They closed everything up. They hid the chest back in the hole. They reassembled the entrance. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay awake, calculating. In the first chest, they had found 15 coins. Now they had found perhaps 100, plus the stones, a considerable fortune, but Vincent had made it clear there was more. A third hiding place, the safe in the south wall, the main cache where the bulk of it was hidden. And Eleanor knew, with a certainty that churned her stomach, that the more they found, the harder it would be to decide the right thing to do, because she wanted that gold. God was her witness, how much she wanted it. She wanted to buy her own land, far from Sebastian. She wanted a house with a roof that didn't leak. She wanted food every day. She wanted a doctor when Laura coughed. She wanted a school for Peter. She wanted clothes that weren't mended 20 times over. She wanted dignity. She wanted security. She wanted to stop being afraid of the next day. And that gold could give her all of it. It could give her a life she had never dreamed of having. But Vincent had asked for something else. He had asked that the gold be used for the people, to heal the wounds of greed. And Eleanor wondered if it was selfish to think that she and her children were also the people, that they too were wounded, that they too deserved to be healed. The following days were strange. On the surface, the routine continued. Thomas fixed the roof. Peter learned carpentry. Laura played. Eleanor sewed. But inside, the 3 adults carried a secret that weighed like a stone in their chests. They didn't talk about the gold. They didn't talk about the moral dilemma. But it was there, hovering between them, changing how they interacted. Old Martha appeared with news from the village. Sebastian was asking about Eleanor. He wanted to know if she had sought legal help, if she had tried to sell more gold, if she had shown up with new money. The old woman gripped Eleanor's hands with urgency. "My child, his deadline is almost up. In 3 days, it will have been a week. He will be back, and he'll bring more men. You need to decide what you're going to do." Eleanor said she was prepared. She didn't specify how. Martha didn't ask. The night before the deadline, Eleanor, Thomas, and Peter gathered in the mill. It was time to find the last hiding place. The safe in the south wall. They used all the clues from the journal, all the papers, all the decoded sequences. The south wall of the first floor was 20 feet long. They tapped on every stone, listening for a hollow sound. Thomas used his carpenter's experience to identify where the mortar was newer, indicating it had been disturbed. They found a suspicious spot about 5 feet off the ground, behind where an old grain bin stood. They removed the stones carefully. Behind the first layer, they found a second, false wall with a hidden mechanism. Thomas studied it, tested it, and discovered he needed to push a specific stone up while turning another to the left. A mechanical click. A section of the wall slid aside, revealing a compartment. And inside, an iron safe, heavy, large and locked. On the front, etched into the metal, was the crest of a stylized ship, the same one from the journal. Thomas examined the lock. This needs a specific key. I can't break it open without tools that would destroy the safe. Eleanor grabbed the journal. She searched desperately. Page 87, the last one, had a drawing of a key, and below it, a phrase, "Hanging where the miller always looked at dawn to thank the new day." Eleanor had an insight. The east window, where he saw the sunrise. They ran up to the attic. The east window had a decaying wooden frame. Eleanor ran her hand over the surface, feeling for anything. Nothing. She looked up at the beam just above it. Thomas, being taller, reached up. He felt a rusty nail. Hanging from it, a key of iron covered in cobwebs and decades of rust. He took it down with reverence. They descended, 3 hearts beating so loudly it seemed impossible that no one else could hear. Thomas inserted the key into the lock. He turned it with difficulty. The rust resisted. He forced it. Click! The safe swung open. Inside was everything. Gold coins, stacked high, hundreds of them, precious stones in velvet pouches, emeralds, small diamonds, rubies. 3 silver bars, and more documents, lists of names, places, smuggling routes, information that could incriminate powerful families if made public. Vincent had kept it all, a life insurance policy or a death warrant. Eleanor sat on the floor because her legs would no longer support her. Peter turned as white as a sheet. Thomas just watched in silence. It was a fortune beyond any imagination for poor folk in the Appalachian hollows of 1891. It was enough money to buy an entire plantation, to live without working for the rest of their lives, to educate their children in the best schools in Richmond or Charleston, to completely change their lives, to become someone else. To no longer be Eleanor Vance, the destitute widow living in a cursed mill, to be Mrs. Eleanor Vance, a respectable lady with property and a guaranteed future. But then Eleanor remembered Vincent's words. She remembered the warning about the curse of conscience. She remembered that she was there, in that ruined mill, not by choice, but by desperation. She remembered her dead husband. She remembered Sebastian offering to forgive her debts in exchange for her body. She remembered how the entire village had turned its back. She remembered the hungry nights. She remembered Laura coughing up blood. She remembered Peter trying to be a man at 9 years old. And she asked herself, if I use this gold only for myself, will I be any different from the smugglers who stole it? Will I be any different from Sebastian, who thinks only of greed? Where is the line between survival and selfishness? Thomas, who had been observing in silence, spoke in a low but firm voice. "Eleanor, can I say something?" She nodded. He continued, "When I lost my wife and son, I wanted to die too. I saw no point in going on. I worked like a madman just to tire my body so I wouldn't have to think. I spent 5 years like that, dead inside but breathing on the outside. And you know what I learned? I learned that money doesn't bring back the ones we've lost. It doesn't cure loneliness. It doesn't give you purpose. But doing something good, something that matters to other people, that can give you meaning. Vincent left this gold with an intention. You can ignore his intention and use it all for yourself. No one would judge you. God knows you deserve it after everything you've been through, but I don't think you'll ever be at peace if you do that. I think you'll spend the rest of your life looking at this gold and seeing the price you paid for it. Peter, sitting between the two adults, took his mother's hand. Mama, we don't need all this. We just need food and a house that doesn't leak. The rest we can use to help people, right? Like great-grandpa wanted. Eleanor looked at her son, 9 years old, but speaking with the wisdom of an old man. She felt a mix of pride and sadness because a child shouldn't have to be wise. A child should be allowed to be selfish, to want toys and luxuries. But Peter had grown up too fast. He had seen his father die. He had gone hungry. He had been evicted from his home. And still, he could think of others. Eleanor took 3 deep breaths. She made a decision that would change everything. This is what I'm going to do. Half of it is for me and my children. I'll use it to buy land, build a decent house, educate them, and have a dignified life. That isn't selfishness. It's survival and responsibility. The other half will go to St. Peter's Falls. I'm going to build a hospital so that mothers don't have to watch their children die of fever without a doctor. I'm going to build a school so that poor children can learn to read and have a future. I'll do what Vincent wanted, but I'll do it my way. A middle ground where I can live in peace, knowing I did the right thing but also took care of my own. Is that wrong? Thomas smiled for the first time since she had known him. A real smile, his eyes lighting up with something that looked like relief. No, Eleanor. That's not wrong at all. That's perfect. Vincent would be proud, and I'm proud of you too. Peter hugged his mother with a force that almost hurt. I knew you'd choose right, Mama. I knew it. Eleanor hugged her son back, letting tears of relief, exhaustion, hope, and fear fall freely. They closed the safe. They hid it behind the false wall again. It wasn't time to use it yet. First, they had to survive what was coming the next day, because Sebastian would be back, and this time it would be war. The morning arrived with a clear sky and a heat that promised a suffocating day. Eleanor woke the children early, gave them coffee with bread that old Martha had brought, and instructed Peter. If there's trouble today, you take your sister and run to old Martha's house. Don't come back no matter what happens. Do you understand? Peter protested, wanting to stay and help. Eleanor was firm. You help me by taking care of Laura. That is your responsibility. The boy reluctantly agreed. Thomas arrived before the sun was high. He brought 2 other men with him. He introduced them. Jerome and Matthew, workers from the village who don't care for Sebastian. They agreed to help. The 2 were strong, with hands calloused from hard labor and serious eyes. Jerome, Eleanor realized with a shock, was one of the thugs who had come with Sebastian during the first threat. The man noticed her recognition and explained, I worked for him because I had to, but I don't agree with his ways. I won't stand by a man who threatens a widow and her children. Old Martha showed up too. She brought Reverend August and 5 other men from the village. A small crowd was forming. Eleanor felt something warm in her chest. She was not alone. The sun was nearly at its highest point when they saw dust on the road. A cavalcade coming fast. Sebastian Thorne arrived with 6 men this time, all of them armed. Machetes, one had an old shotgun, another carried a thick club. They dismounted in a threatening semicircle. The landowner looked at the group gathered in front of the mill, and his expression turned dangerous. What's this? A party? He walked until he was face to face with Eleanor. Your time is up. Have you decided to accept my offer, or are we going to do this the hard way? Eleanor kept her voice steady, though her heart was racing. I'm not accepting anything. This property is mine. What is or isn't here is my business. You have no right to it. Leave, and don't come back. And Sebastian laughed, but it was a humorless, dangerous laugh, like a snake before it strikes. Rights? I'll show you rights. He signaled to his men. Search this place. Tear it apart. Find the gold and bring it to me." The thugs advanced. Jerome and Matthew stood in their way. The other men from the village did too. Reverend August held up the cross he carried. "In the name of God, this is robbery." Sebastian shoved the reverend aside with a force that made the old man fall. "God has nothing to do with this, you old fool. This is about money, about power, about teaching this arrogant wench her place." His thugs clashed with the villagers. Fists, shoves, a generalized brawl. Eleanor screamed for Peter to take Laura and run. The boy obeyed, grabbing his sister's hand, and they took off down the trail to Martha's house. Thomas grabbed Sebastian by the arm before he could enter the mill. "You're not going in there." "Lodu." The landowner turned with a punch that grazed Thomas's jaw. The carpenter staggered, but didn't fall. He retaliated with a solid punch to the stomach that knocked the wind out of Sebastian. The fight escalated. Shouts, curses, the sound of flesh hitting flesh. Eleanor was paralyzed for a second, then ran into the mill. She had to protect the safe. She reached the first floor when she heard heavy footsteps behind her. She turned. One of the thugs, a large man with a scar on his face, was coming up the stairs, machete in hand. "Where's the gold, woman? I know it's here. Vincent hid it and you found it. Tell me where it is." Eleanor backed away. "There's no gold. It's all just a legend." The man advanced. "Liar! The storekeeper said you paid with an old gold coin. It had to come from somewhere." If you're enjoying this story, leave a like and share it with those you love. Eleanor kept backing up until she hit the wall. The thug was 6 feet away when a strong voice cut through the air. "Stop right there!" The man turned. Jerome was at the top of the stairs. He'd been quick. The scarred thug snarled. "You're on the wrong side, Jerome. What do you gain by protecting her?" Jerome answered calmly. "My conscience. Something you don't have. Now get down those stairs before I make you." The two men stared each other down. The tension was so thick it felt solid. Finally, the thug spat on the floor and went down muttering threats. Outside, the chaos continued. But something had changed. More people from the village were beginning to arrive. Women, old men, even children. Curious at first, but when they saw what was happening, they took a side. Old Martha was shouting for everyone to hear. "He's trying to rob the woman's property. He's using violence against a defenseless widow. This is a crime. We need the sheriff." Someone noted it was market day, and there were now more than 30 people there. Sebastian realized he was losing. He had 6 men, but he was surrounded by a growing crowd, and a crowd has power, even without weapons. Thomas, his lip bleeding but standing firm, spoke loudly for all to hear. "Sebastian Thorne is trying to take property that isn't his. He's using threats and violence because he knows he has no legal right to it. Mrs. Vance is the rightful owner of this mill. She has documents filed with the county. She has a valid will. She has witnesses. He just wants to steal what doesn't belong to him." The crowd murmured in agreement. Old Martha shouted again. "He's a thief, always has been. He's bought land from widows, paying them next to nothing. Now he wants to do the same to Eleanor." Sebastian realized he had lost. It was too public, too many witnesses. Even his cousin the sheriff couldn't ignore this. He backed away slowly, calling his men. His expression was one of pure hatred. "This isn't over, Eleanor. I'll go to the courts. I'll prove I have rights to any discovery made on land surrounded by my own. I'll hire a lawyer. I'll drag you through a lawsuit. I'll take everything you have." He mounted his horse. "You may have won today, but you'll lose in court. You can be sure of that." He galloped away with his thugs, leaving a cloud of dust and threats in the air. The crowd slowly dispersed. Some stayed to see if Eleanor was all right. They offered help, words of support. Thomas wiped the blood from his lip with his sleeve. Jerome and Matthew checked their bruises. Nothing serious. Reverend August got up from the ground where he had fallen, dusting off his cassock. "Mrs. Vance, I came here today to apologize to you. I should not have judged you. I should have helped when you needed it. If there is anything the church can do now, you need only ask." Eleanor felt tears threatening, but held them back. "Thank you, Reverend. Thank you, everyone. I don't know how to thank you." Old Martha hugged her tightly. "No need for thanks, child. We do what's right, and protecting a widow and her orphans is what's right." But Sebastian's threat of a lawsuit weighed on her. Eleanor knew he was serious. He had money for lawyers. He had influence. And his argument about discovery rights on surrounded land had a twisted logic that might work in a corrupt court. Thomas, who understood contracts from his work as a carpenter, offered to investigate. "I'll go to Richmond. I'll get a copy of the documents he filed. I'll see if this right he claims even exists. And I'll take your papers from the will to officially register that the property and everything in it is yours by inheritance, not discovery." "That's an important legal difference," Eleanor agreed. Thomas left the next day for Richmond, a 2-day journey each way. He was gone for a full week, the longest week of Eleanor's life. She stayed at home with the children, working in the garden she had started, sewing, trying to maintain a normal routine, but always looking down the road, expecting to see Sebastian returning with a marshal. Jerome came by every day to check on them. Old Martha brought food. Other villagers began to treat Eleanor differently, with respect, with solidarity. The courageous widow who had stood up to the powerful landowner. When Thomas finally returned, he brought news, good and bad. The bad first. Sebastian had indeed filed for right-of-way on the surrounding lands, but Thomas had discovered that these rights were limited. They gave him the right to charge a toll for use of the public road, but they gave him no rights over discoveries or the property itself. A lawyer in Richmond, an honest man Thomas knew, had confirmed it. Eleanor had full rights to everything on her inherited property. Vincent's will, filed in 1873 and never contested, was valid, and Thomas had managed to get the discovery officially registered as a documented family inheritance, not as found treasure. Technically, legally, Eleanor was protected. But there was a complication. Sebastian had indeed filed a lawsuit. And although it had no solid legal basis, the lawsuit could drag on for years. It could freeze the property. It could prevent Eleanor from selling or using anything until a final decision was made. It was a war of attrition. To make her life impossible until she agreed to a settlement, Eleanor listened to everything and made a decision. "I'm not going to wait for a lawsuit. I'm going to do what I need to do now. I'll use half the gold to buy more land, far from Sebastian's. I'll build a new house there. I'll move with the children. And I'll use the other half to immediately begin construction on the hospital and school I promised. If he wants to sue me, let him. But when the judge comes to investigate, what will he find? A charitable work being built, a community being helped. He'll look like a greedy man trying to take that from a widow who is using her inheritance for the common good." Thomas smiled. "It's risky, but it's smart." Jerome, who was present, agreed. "The people of the village will be on your side, and a jury, if it comes to that, will never convict you." Old Martha, ever practical, asked how much Eleanor had exactly. Eleanor went to get the papers where she had written a complete inventory of the 3 caches. 487 gold coins, 23 precious stones, including emeralds and small diamonds, 3 silver bars. The total value, estimated by Thomas after consulting with a merchant in Richmond, over $100,000, an immense fortune by the standards of the time. Eleanor did the math in her head. 50,000 for her and the children, 25,000 to buy land, 15,000 to build a house, 10,000 for the children's education and a reserve fund, 50,000 for the hospital and school, 10,000 for the future maintenance of the public buildings. That still left the precious stones, which she would keep as insurance for emergencies, and the documents about the smuggling, which she decided to burn. She didn't want to use blackmail. She didn't want to become what Vincent had been. She started work immediately. She bought a 100-acre plot 2 leagues away, good land with a river running through it. She paid a fair price, not trying to bargain, using the power the gold gave her. She hired Thomas as the lead builder, Jerome and Matthew as his assistants, 10 more workers from the village. She paid decent wages, better than the norm. She bought quality lumber, good shingles, bricks. The house she designed was simple but solid. 5 rooms, a separate kitchen, a large yard for a garden and livestock, a porch with a view of the mountains, a family home, a real home. Simultaneously, she started the hospital project. Land donated by the church in the center of St. Peter's Falls, a 2-story building. The ground floor with 3 patient rooms, a treatment room and a kitchen. The second floor with a room for a resident doctor, a room for simple surgeries and medicine storage. Reverend August got in touch with a newly graduated doctor in Richmond who agreed to come for the salary Eleanor offered, a young idealist who wanted to make a difference. The school was designed next to the hospital, a large room with capacity for 40 students, different age groups in different shifts. A teacher was also hired from Richmond, a single, scholarly woman of 30 who accepted the offer to teach in a small village because Eleanor guaranteed a salary and a house to live in. A library would be built attached. Eleanor used part of the money to buy books. First in Richmond, then she ordered more from Charleston. The transformation of St. Peter's Falls began physically. Construction projects bustled in the village. Workers arrived from neighboring towns looking for jobs. Commerce improved because the workers spent their wages locally. Mr. Anselm, the general store owner, expanded his stock. He added more space. The blacksmith had more work than he could handle. Other families began to move back to the village that was coming back to life, and the gossip changed its tone. Before they talked about the crazy widow of the cursed mill. Now they talked about Mrs. Eleanor, the benefactress, the woman who used her inheritance to build a hospital and a school. Women who had once avoided her now came asking for sewing work. Eleanor accepted them all, paid them well, and taught those who didn't know how. A small cottage industry formed, 6 seamstresses working together, producing clothes, sheets and towels that they sold in neighboring villages. Sebastian continued with his lawsuit, but his influence was waning, because it was becoming obvious to everyone, even to the bought-off sheriff and judge, that Eleanor was doing nothing wrong. She was using her legally inherited property to improve her own life, and that of the community. When the judge finally visited St. Peter's Falls 5 months after the dispute began, he found a nearly completed hospital, a school well under construction, a prosperous village, and an entire population supporting Eleanor. The judge, an old man tired of his own corruption, looked at it all, looked at Sebastian complaining beside him, and made a rare decision. He decided to do the right thing. The verdict was read in January 1892, 3 months after the visit. The property was confirmed as belonging entirely to Eleanor Vance by right of legitimate and indisputable inheritance. Sebastian Thorne had no rights whatsoever over any discoveries, treasures, or anything else within the inherited property. The right-of-way, he claimed, was valid only for the public road and gave him no control over Eleanor's movements. Sebastian was ordered to pay all court costs, and he received a warning from the judge about his use of violence and intimidation, with the threat of criminal prosecution if he continued. Sebastian Thorne never recovered from the defeat. He lost respect. He lost influence. The gambling debts he had hidden began to surface. Creditors started calling. 6 months later, he had to sell land to pay them. A year later, he was ruined. He left St. Peter's Falls one foggy morning, mounted on a thin horse, carrying all he owned in 2 saddlebags. No one said goodbye. No one missed him. Eleanor, on the other hand, flourished in a way she herself would not have thought possible. The new house was finished in May 1892. Moving day was a celebration. Half the village helped carry her few belongings from the mill to the new house. Thomas had built furniture, a large table of hardwood, comfortable chairs, beds with real mattresses, wardrobes. Peter got his own room, a first in his life. Laura got a room with a real glass window from which she could see the orchard Eleanor had planted. Eleanor had a room with a large bed where she finally slept without fear of the ceiling collapsing or someone breaking in. The hospital was inaugurated in June with a festival that lasted all day. Reverend August blessed the building. The doctor, Dr. Miles, gave a speech on the importance of health for all, not just the wealthy. Eleanor cut a red ribbon at the door. The first patient was a 4-year-old girl with pneumonia. She was saved. The second was a woman in complicated labor. Both mother and baby survived. The third was a man who had cut his leg with a hoe. An infection that would have been fatal was treated. The hospital saved 3 lives in its first 2 weeks. Within 2 months, it had treated over 50 patients. News spread. People from villages 2-3 leagues away began to come. Dr. Miles asked for help. Eleanor hired a second doctor and 3 women to work as nurses. The school opened in August, at the start of the school year. 42 students on the first day, boys and girls, a revolutionary thing, ages 6 to 14. The teacher, Miss Adelaide, was firm but kind. She taught reading, writing, basic arithmetic, geography, a little history. Peter was among the students, finally able to get a real education. Laura, too, the youngest in the class, but diligent. Eleanor visited the school once a week, bringing snacks she prepared with other mothers. Bread, cornbread cake, apple butter, coffee with milk. The library opened in December with 53 books. Eleanor had bought translated classics, American history books, world geographies, novels approved by the church, and technical books on agriculture and construction. It was the first public library in St. Peter's Falls. Children came after school. Adults came at night. Miss Adelaide organized read-aloud sessions on Saturdays. The whole community participated. The transformation was visible. St. Peter's Falls, which had 140 inhabitants in 1891, reached 230 by 1893. What had been a dying village was becoming a place where people wanted to live. It had a doctor, it had a school, it had a library, it had work, it had hope. And Eleanor was different too. Physically, she had gained weight. She was no longer thin from hunger. She was healthy. Her face had color. Her eyes had a spark. Her hands were still calloused, but now from chosen work, not desperation. She wore simple but clean dresses without patches. Her hair was tied in a bun, but with ribbons. She walked with her head held high. She greeted everyone on the street. She was respected. She was loved. She was an example, and there was Thomas. The carpenter who had come to help out of a moral debt had stayed. He continued to live on his homestead, but spent entire days at Eleanor's property. Building, fixing, teaching Peter, playing with Laura, and talking with Eleanor, long conversations on moonlit nights. Sitting on the porch of the new house, they talked about the past, about their losses, about how pain transforms people. They talked about the future, about small dreams that now seem possible. They talked about loneliness and how heavy it is. And they talked, without saying it directly, about how good it was to have company. It was on a spring afternoon in 1893, 2 years after Eleanor had arrived at the mill, that Thomas asked for her hand. It wasn't a romantic proposal on one knee with flowers. It was the two of them, sitting by the creek, watching Peter and Laura play in the water. Thomas said, without looking directly at her, that he was thinking of building an addition onto his house. 2 more rooms, just in case he needed them. Eleanor asked why he would need more rooms if he lived alone. He replied that maybe he wouldn't always be living alone. that maybe he had found a reason not to be alone anymore, that he would like, if she wanted to as well, for them to be a real family, not just friends, not just work partners, but husband and wife. Eleanor was silent for so long that Thomas began to think he had ruined everything. But then she turned, looked at him with eyes that shone with moisture, and said yes, that she was also tired of being alone, that she also wanted a family, that she trusted him in a way she never thought she could trust a man again, that she loved his kindness, his patience, the way he treated her children, that she wanted to wake up every day and see his face, that she wanted to grow old with him and see their grandchildren playing in the same creek where Peter and Laura were playing now. They were married in June 1893 in a simple ceremony at the church in St. Peter's Falls. Reverend August officiated. Old Martha cried with joy. Peter was the ring bearer. Laura was the flower girl. The entire village attended. The celebration lasted until dawn with plenty of food, fiddle music, dancing and laughter. Eleanor wore a white dress she had sewn herself. Thomas wore a borrowed suit. They exchanged vows with steady voices and eyes locked on each other. And when they kissed, sealing their promise, sincere applause erupted. 9 months later, Frances was born, named in honor of the old woman who had passed away peacefully 2 months earlier, at the age of 76, knowing she had seen the village transformed. The baby was healthy, cried loudly, and had her mother's eyes. Peter, now 12, was a proud brother. Laura, 8, helped take care of her. Thomas held his newborn daughter with large hands that trembled with emotion, his eyes full of tears. Eleanor watched from the bed, exhausted but radiant, seeing her husband with their baby, seeing her older children, seeing the family she had built from the ashes of tragedy. The following years were of continued prosperity. Eleanor maintained the sewing cooperative, now with 15 employees. She also opened a small bakery that employed 5 more women. The profits she always shared, part for her family, part for the maintenance of the hospital and school. She created a fund with the precious stones she had saved. When she sold the first emerald in Richmond, she used the money to build an orphanage, small for 10 children, but functional. She hired an elderly, childless couple to run it. The mill, the original mill where it all began, Eleanor completely renovated. Thomas led the work, transforming the ruin back into a functional grist mill. They spent 18 months on it. They replaced the rotten wood. They restored the gears. They repaired the water wheel. In April 1895, the mill was operational again. It ground flour for the entire region. It generated employment. And when the wind blew hard from the southeast, making the gears sing their metallic whisper, Eleanor would go up to the first floor, close her eyes, and give thanks. She thanked Vincent for having saved a fortune with wisdom. She thanked him for leaving a code she was able to decipher. She thanked the cursed place for the second chance it had given her. In 1896, 5 years after arriving as a desperate widow with 2 hungry children, Eleanor was a respected landowner. She had a large house, productive land, profitable businesses, 3 healthy children, and a husband she loved and who loved her back. But more than that, she had left a legacy. The hospital had treated over 800 patients. 17 lives had been directly saved. The school had 52 regular students and offered night classes for adults. 23 people had learned to read as adults. The library now had 90 books. The orphanage had taken in 6 abandoned children. The village had grown to 280 inhabitants, and the story had spread. Other villages began to copy the model. A landowner in a neighboring town donated money to build a school there too, inspired by Eleanor's example. A doctor from a larger city offered to train nurses for free. A small but significant movement of change had begun, and all because a desperate widow had had the courage to live in a place no one wanted, had had the intelligence to decipher an impossible code, and had had the right heart to make a difficult choice when she found a fortune. Vincent Vance's name was publicly cleared. Eleanor had a bronze plaque made and placed at the entrance of the hospital in memory of Vincent Vance, the miller who preserved hope when no one else believed. May his legacy continue to heal wounds and build futures. The plaque remains to this day. On a windy afternoon 5 years later, Eleanor went up to the mill alone. She was 40 years old now. Her face was marked by work and sun, but beautiful in the way that joy makes people beautiful. She stood on the first floor, listening to the metallic whisper of the wind in the gears. The sound that had so frightened her at first was now comforting, familiar, like the voice of a dear relative. She closed her eyes, letting the sound envelop her, and she whispered to the wind as if Vincent could hear, "Thank you, great-grandfather. I fulfilled your promise. I used what you saved to heal, not to hurt, to build, not to destroy. I hope you are proud. I hope you have found peace, wherever you are." The wind blew harder, the gears sang louder, and Eleanor swore, though she knew it was impossible, though she knew it was just her imagination, that she heard a reply. A low voice, whispered by the wind itself. "I am proud, granddaughter. You understood what few understand. True fortune is not the gold we keep, but the good we do. You are richer than anyone I ever knew. Continue to spread that wealth. That is how curses are broken. That is how redemption happens." Eleanor opened her eyes. She smiled. She descended the wooden stairs, now firm and safe. She crossed the flourishing yard. She entered the house where the voices of her children and husband welcomed her with joy. Dinner was being prepared. The table would be set. The family would gather. And in that simplicity, in that blessedly ordinary routine, lay the true treasure. They say that on windy afternoons in St. Peter's Falls, when the southeast wind passes through the old mill, you can still hear a whisper. But it is no longer the voice of the past, guarding a secret. It is the echo of a story that proves that no matter how far you fall, there is always a chance to start over. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance we receive comes not in the form of gold, but in the form of the courage to do what is right, even when no one is looking. Eleanor Vance proved that the wind, when listened to with an open heart, brings not just whispers of fortune, it brings whispers of redemption, and redemption, unlike gold, never loses its value. It multiplies, it spreads, it transforms not only the one who receives it, but the one who gives, and it continues to echo, generation after generation, whispered by the wind that never stops blowing.